You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Episode 83, Speaking Te Reo Maori. Hello, language lovers. Happy New Year, and thank you for joining me for this episode of Speaking Tongues, the podcast and conversation with multilinguals. After a short break at the end of 2021, I'm happy to be back to bring you this episode with my guest Amelia, the founder of Learn Maori Abroad, to talk about Te Reo Maori. In this conversation, we're learning a ton about the Māori language, culture, and community. Amelia tells us about grammar basics and dialectical differences of the language. Amelia tells us about how the Maori people honor the connections between one another and with nature, and how patriarchal systems have had an impact on Maori culture. We also learn the cultural importance and significance of one of my absolute favorite things on earth. Let's see if you can guess what that is. And stay tuned, of course, for Amelia's answer to the last question of the episode, where she recites a meaningful Karakia in Maori with a valuable message that I think should be heard by all. Big thank you to Amelia for sharing so much of your culture with us, and don't forget to check out Learn Maori Abroad, links to which can be found in the show notes. If you enjoy this episode of Speaking Tongues, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Speaking Tongues podcast on Apple Podcasts, and like and subscribe on YouTube so that other language lovers like ourselves can find the show. And if you've been a long-time listener of the show or even a recent listener, you can support the show on buymeacoffee.com. Links to all platforms are in the show notes. Okay, let's chat. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I'm here today with Amelia. How are you today, Amelia?
Hi, Ali. Doing really well. Really excited to be here on your amazing podcast.
Thank you so much. And I'm so thrilled that you're joining me from New Zealand, which I told you before we started recording is one of my top destinations in the world. So I have so many things that I want to learn from you and talk to you about in this conversation. So I'm excited to really talk to you today. I like to start each episode with the same question, and that is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Ali, that is a great question. So my first language is English. Native English speaker. And then I learned Te Reo Maori, which is the Māori language. Just as I was growing up, I went to Māori full immersion preschool and also studied Te Reo Maori in high school and at university. So Māori is my second language. And then, so even though I'm here in New Zealand, I'm based in California. And so I have learned some Spanish just because there's a big Spanish speaking population in Southern California. So those three languages, I'd say, are my main languages.
Very cool. So I picked up, you're saying Te Reo Maori. Am I pronouncing that kind of right? A little bit?
Yes, that was very good.
When you're saying Te Reo Maori, what does that translate to?
So the word reo, it means, in this context, it means language. So, and then te is our the, so Te Reo Maori is the Maori language.
Oh, okay. Okay, so for this conversation, should I say Maori? Should I say Te Reo Maori? What do you prefer, or what is encouraged for us to say?
So what's encourages to say Te Reo Maori, because that distinguishes the language from the people. So I am Maori, I'm an Indigenous Maori woman, and Maori are the Indigenous people of New Zealand, for those who might not know. So usually if we're talking about like Maori as in the people, or a person is Maori, we would say Maori. But specifically when we talk about the language, we say Te Reo Maori. although you can also say, I speak Maori, but it's better if you can say I speak Te Reo Maori.
Oh, okay. Te Reo Maori where is it spoken? Where can we hear it? And which languages is it related to?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So Te Reo Maori is spoken here in Aotearoa in New Zealand. So Aotearoa is the Maori name for New Zealand. And, it's not really spoken anywhere else. Although with the work I do have a lot of students who live all over the world. And so in that sense, we are speaking it in other places. But of course, it is our Indigenous language here in New Zealand. So Māori or Te Reo Maori is from the language family known as the Austronesian language family. And for us, the closest languages to Te Reo Maori are Hawaiian, Cook Island Māori, and Tahitian.
Oh, Cook Island Maori. What are some of the similarities and what are some of the differences between Te Reo Maori and Cook Island Maori?
So, well, for me, I'm not so much an expert on Cook Island Māori, but I know one of the differences is in Te Reo Māori, we say ki ora, and then in Cook Island Māori, they say ki orana. So, and then our counting is very, very similar. So, yeah, and it's like this with a lot of the islands from the Pacific Ocean region. So, a lot of our Pacific Island cousins, there's a lot of similarities in certain word usages and even sentence structures that you'll see.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking back to two episodes that I did in 2021, and one was about Hawaiian language and one was about Reotiti. So for me, this is like full circle because I'm learning about these cousin languages of one another. And I think it's so exciting. And I think what I've learned about Polynesian culture is that we have this, I guess I could say, as an American, I have always seen this like very generic, like Polynesian culture representation. And I think that it's unfair, frankly, to just kind of lump everyone together. But it's been really wonderful for me to have these conversations and learn about the differences in the cultures and the similarities as well, and just learn like what makes these. I really like how you said cousins. What really makes them all just kind of stand out from one another and be individual from one another. I want to talk about, from what I researched before before having this conversation, is that Te Reo Maori is not, or was not, historically a written language. So what was, I mean, when did it start to become a written language? And how did the shift between an oral language to the written language, how did it affect, or did it affect the way that people communicate with one another?
So, in terms of, Te Reo Māori moving from being an oral tradition or, orally passed down from generation to generation through our stories, through our songs, through our prayers and, Māori proverbs, um, the introduction to writing came when the British arrived in New Zealand and, essentially colonized New Zealand. And so I think it was in the early 1900s when, the missionaries also came and, brought with them the gospel, the written word. And so these elements introduced writing to our people. And so, since then, Māori or Te Reo Māori has developed as a written language as well as an oral language. But traditionally, it was always, an oral language. Everything was passed down through these stories and generations, just waha, which means by mouth. Yeah. So, it wasn't until the arrival of the missionaries that, the British introduced the written language to my ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Did at all, was there ever a period, and I'm thinking of in the case of Hawaiian, for example, where learning the Hawaiian language was discouraged. And now it's kind of going through a revitalization period, and people are looking to push it to the forefront for, for Native Hawaiians. Did Te Reo Maori experience anything like that?
Yes, we definitely did. So my grandmother is in the generation that was beaten and caned at school for speaking Māori. So my grandmother, like many in her generation, they were the first to go to these, native schools set up by, colonization, the British, and different laws that were then passed. And my grandmother, being a fluent native speaker of the language, would speak Māori to her cousins and brothers and sisters, and they would be punished for that. And so, according to my mother, my grandmother was, caned many times, as was many of our ancestors in that generation. And so she grew up raising her children to speak English only. And so, as a result, my mother raised me speaking English, although she did still send me to kohanga reo. So when I was very young, I went to a Māori learning language nest, and this was in the 80s. And so the 1980s is when the Māori language movement first started. So in the 80s, the Māori language became an official language of New Zealand, along with English and sign language. And then also in the 80s, they started this big, Māori schooling movement, starting up full immersion language schools for very young children, and also for older children. And so I was lucky to be born in the 80s and was able to be exposed to the language at a very early age. But then after that, I did go to primary school or elementary school. It was all English, as well as my high school, although my mother actually fought for me to learn Māori in my high school, because this was the 90s, and the school I went to, they only had French, German, and Japanese. And this is a school in New Zealand, in Auckland, the biggest city in New Zealand. But she fought that so I could learn Māori by correspondence. So I did get to learn. It was me and one other girl, and we learned Māori just by ourselves. It was back when we had the cassette tapes.
Oh,
we would
yes.
record and then send our little package to our teacher, who was in Wellington, which is the capital city here in New Zealand. And so, that's where I really got to study the language. And then I did go on to major in Māori in my university studies and my Bachelor of Arts. So that was Māori language, Māori culture, and also Māori performance. And so that really gave me, my foundation in terms of what I'm doing now, teaching the language. But yeah, so very similar to our Hawaiian cousins there, and actually to many Indigenous people around the world, our culture was almost wiped out and our language was almost wiped out. But our ancestors fought to revitalize it, and now there's a massive Māori language movement here in New Zealand, where a lot of people are learning Māori. There's just like a big revitalization happening, which is just so wonderful to see.
I love to hear that. I love to hear that people are looking forward to the future and revitalizing the language and the culture. So if the language was discouraged, if people of your grandmother's generation were discouraged and physically punished for speaking their language and discouraged, what about the traditions and the culture? Did that have any way of maybe sneaking in, and maybe, because I would presume it's happening behind closed doors, within, your home and amongst relatives. Did was the culture able to stay strong where the language couldn't?
So, in a lot of ways, also the culture was kind of treated the same way as the language. So there was a act of parliament passed called the Tohunga Suppression Act, which suppressed all of our Māori experts in practicing, our traditional medicines, our traditional spiritual beliefs. And so there was definitely, with colonization, there's definitely a very outward approach to oppression and really kind of eradicating these Indigenous cultural beliefs and really turning, the Indigenous into a colonial or a colony of the essentially of the British Empire. So so that had that had similar, went down a similar path, but we're lucky because there's definitely knowledge bodies that have survived through all that. For instance, one of my friends, he's a taonga puoro practitioner, so he shares our traditional Māori music using our traditional Māori instruments, and creating sounds that come from, the New Zealand bush and also from the sea. So there are things that have survived in, family groupings, and then also certain things that have been lost. Because I'm from the north of the north, we were actually the first place where the British landed and British arrived. So because of that, the north of the North Island, we assimilated a lot quicker versus more remote tribes like Tuhoi. They were able to hold on to things because the British didn't quite get to them as quickly as they got to us here in the far north. And so, in that sense, things were lost. But again, we're seeing a big revitalization with, these cultural elements, people practicing, Māori medicine, different parts of Māori culture, like our carving or our weaving. So all of those things are having a renaissance and kind of being revitalized as well. So that's all really great to see. And then I think, the biggest element in us still having these taonga or these treasures is our marae. So even though, these things were outlawed, we would still meet in our on our traditional meeting place, our marae. We'd still gather there, and people would speak in Māori there, and practice our traditional culture there. And so really our marae helped us to protect and hold on to a lot of our culture, even having a lot of our culture existing within our waiata, our songs, and these songs were passed on. So yes, but now there's a lot more information available. There's a lot more emphasis on, these cultural elements coming, being brought back into the mainstream and being shared. So it's really exciting to see.
Yeah. I can't wait to come visit. I'm so excited. Just hearing about this is so exciting. Let's talk about the language. What are some hallmarks of Te Reo Maori and the pronunciation? Is it tonal? Is it gendered? What's sentence structure like? Tell me just some of the very, very basics to get us started.
Well, I think with Te Reo Maori, we don't really, it's not gendered like other languages might be. So, and even in our language, we have non-gender specific terms. For example, our word for he or she is ia. And so we would use ia regardless if it was a man or a woman. So we do have these non-gender specific terms in our language. And then I think in terms of the sentence structure, we have different sentence types, like, our verb sentences, our noun sentences. And it's similar to other languages where, if you're including an adjective, we put the adjective after the noun. Yeah, we have these basic sentence structures, like, we have our tense marker, then our verb, then our subject. So, that's a difference from English there. For us, we don't change the verb, so it'll stay the same, the word. We actually change the words around it. Versus in English, we change the verb, like, go, going, gone. Yeah. Yeah. So, but in Māori, we don't do that. It's the, the little tense markers around the verb that change.
Do you have an example?
Sure. So, for example, the word which means to go is haere.
Haere.
And kei te haere aho would be I am going. I haere aho, I went. And then ka haere aho, I will go.
Okay.
So the haere was the same in each of the three sentences, but the tense markers changed. So kei te is present tense, I is past tense, and ka is future tense, although ka can actually go for all three tenses. But in my beginner's level course, I just teach ka for future tense.
I see. Are these tenses in Te Reo Maori, are they as simple as you just described, or do they get more complex? Like I went, or I had gone, I had went somewhere. Are those types of more complex tenses a part of the language as well?
Yeah, so in that case, we might use kua. So kua is past perfect tense. So kua haere aho, I have gone.
Okay. Okay. I know that a lot of indigenous languages, and this is one thing that I really love because I think it's really missing from like English and especially as it's spoken in America, but a lot of indigenous languages have particular greetings or like honorable ways of talking to elders in the community. And also to anyone who's like a teacher or someone who's well respected in the community, anyone who's prominent. Are there any titles or any greetings or honorifics for these type of people in Maori community?
Yes. So my two girls, my daughters, they go to um, like a bilingual school, and my youngest is in a full immersion classroom. And so at their school, it's also, predominantly Māori. So they would refer to their teacher as, they'd use the word fire. So fire translates as auntie. And then they also use for the male, for there's a male principal there, so they refer to him as matua. All right. So, for example, so they would say, fire Jesse, for example, or matua Jamie. So we do use those terms out of respect, but also it touches upon how we relate to others, and that we are all one, we're all family, whether they're from the same tribe as me or not, we're still one big family. And for us as Māori, that also extends to everybody. So we see people from different ethnicities or different cultures as they're just another tribe like us, and so we have this really expansive concept of family and how we relate to each other. And part of it is also respect. So in my classes that I teach, I do use fire and matua for those who are older. So, people who are my parents' age and who are learning Māori, and those who are Māori themselves, like I will refer to them as fire, and or use their name, like Fire Wiki is one of my students. So yeah, it is out of respect to those who are older than us, but it's also really connects us back to our Māori worldview about how everything is connected, that we are just one small glimpse or one small speck in the overall picture, and that we are connected to each other, to our families, to our tribes, to nature, and to our ancestors.
Mm-hmm. I want to get to that in a minute and talk about just that concept of connection and being connected. But one last question about the language itself. Are there dialects throughout New Zealand of Te Reo Maori, and roughly how many are there? How mutually intelligible are they? And what part of the country are they spoken?
So yes, we do have dialectal differences throughout Aotearoa, New Zealand. So, in terms of being able to understand each other, yes, we can all understand each other. So just like, American English, British English, New Zealand English, like we can understand each other. And there might be a few words we use differently, but we can still understand and communicate. So that's same with us when it comes to our different dialects across the Motu, the islands. So so then in terms of, well, just a quick example, one of my friends, he's from Taranaki, which is on the west side, but it's lower down on the North Island. And so, instead of saying whenua, which means land, he would say wenua. So they drop. So in Māori, we have a WH that sounds like a F sound. It's like an F sound. So, but he would drop the H and say wenua instead of whenua. And so we see different variations like this, depending on where you're from.
Going back to what you were talking about before, about being connected and connected to nature, connected to one another, and recognizing and acknowledging that, tell us about some cultural concepts that are prevalent in Maori communities, and what some of their meanings are.
So, one of our fundamental concepts we have in Te Reo Maori, which is the Maori world or Maori culture, is the concept of whakapapa. And that concept is translated as family genealogy. And so it's me, it's my mother, it's my grandmother and great grandparents, and it's our whole web. And so in that sense, our culture exists on this matrix of whakapapa, which takes us, so for me and all of us, it takes us all the way back, great grandparents, all the way back. And it allows us to connect to, from our Māori worldview, the first human who was Hineahu on there, and then all the way back to the beginning of the universe. So our creation story, it's Rangi Nui, our sky father, and Papa Tuanuku, our earth mother. They're in a tight embrace, and they had many children, but their children were born into the darkness. And then one of their children, Tane Mahuta, who is the god of the forest, he pushed them apart to the world we now live in, with the sky above and the earth below. And so, we have a lot of these different pūrākau, these stories, which explain these natural phenomena, how things are like they are. But they all exist on the web or on the matrix of whakapapa. And so not only does whakapapa connect us, all the way back, it also connects us all the way forward. So all of our uri, our descendants. And so in that sense, because of this kind of thinking, us as Māori and, Indigenous people also have this wider view of life and our existence. And so that's why often you'll see the Indigenous people who are the ones to, be protecting certain elements of nature, to, be protesting for these environmental changes that are being detrimental on Papa Tuanuku, on Mother Earth, because we do have this wider concept of our lives and our existence. And we also relate to ourselves as, us as the individual. We are not the most important thing. It's actually the collective or the community that is the most important thing. And so, so that's one of our main principles, whakapapa. And then, we do have other principles that are also important, like whanaungatanga, which is creating those connections or those relationships with others. Manaakitanga, being generous or, looking after or being hospitable to others, taking care of others. We also have, different ideas when it comes to supporting others. A word for that is tautoko, to support. So, those are just a handful. Also, our concept of family, the word for family is whānau, but that's better defined as extended family, because our idea of family is not the nuclear family. It's our whānau includes, our cousins, our aunties, our uncles, our nephews, our nieces. So it's this, very much more expansive concept of family. And it even goes out to our second cousins, our third cousins, our, fourth cousins.
Does it extend to podcasters in New York City who really want to be a part of
Yes.
this?
Yes, it definitely does, because it
Yes.
actually extends to everyone. Because, from the Maori worldview, we're all connected, and so, very different from the Western worldview, where I'm an individual and it's all about me. But it's from a Maori worldview, we're all connected, we're all one, with each other, but also with nature, and that's actually reflected in our language, where we see, like, for example, in the Western culture, there's this idea that man is above nature or man is separate from nature. As in our culture, we see ourselves as one with nature and connected to nature. So in our language, we would actually say, ko wai tō maunga, which translates as, who is your mountain? So we're relating. So I would ask, ko wai tō maunga, who is your mountain? But I would also say, ko wai tō mama, who is your mother, in just the same way. And so, as you can see, we're relating to things like our mountains and our rivers, just as we would relate to a person. And so, but in English, ko wai tō maunga, it means, who is your mountain? But we would actually translate that as, what is your mountain? That's just because of the Western worldview, that nature is a thing and separate from us. And so to be grammatically correct in English, we would say, what is your mountain? Because in the Western world, a mountain isn't a who, it's a thing.
Right.
But in an Indigenous concept, our mountain is our ancestors, and it's who we whakapapa to. So it's
right.
A mountain is part of our family genealogy.
I'm telling you, I think society went so wrong by trying to shut out Indigenous practices and voices and ideologies, because I hear this and I'm like, where is this in our lives? Because this is something I feel like we all really need, especially after months, over a year being, in a pandemic. And I can't help but think, if more of us had this base, this foundation, this ideology, this way of thinking about, nature and humanity, instead of being egocentric, we'd be all so much better off. In New Zealand, I know that, and as you explained, that the culture and the language, there's official status, hooray, and that there seems, from as an outsider who looks at New Zealand quite a bit, it seems like the culture is so embraced, and to me, it seems like it's embraced, and that people are so proud of it, regardless of if they're Indigenous or if they are white New Zealanders. But I'm really curious to know what the exchange is like, and how Indigenous communities interact with the white communities in New Zealand, and is everybody really proud? I hope so, but I mean, what is it really like there, and what is the exchange of culture like, between these two cultures?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, Ellie. I think, just like in America, on Turtle Island there, you do have some, white people, some Pākehā who are, they're allies, they're learning Te Reo Maori because, they want to see this language not only survive, but thrive. And I have a lot of great students who are, Pākehā, they identify as Kiwis or as New Zealanders, but they're not Māori. And so it's wonderful to see, those who are not Māori really embracing, Te Reo Maori and, Te Ao Maori, the Maori culture, is, partly as an identifier for our wider New Zealand culture. So yeah, that's been really great to see. I also have, a couple of really good friends who, I'll often speak in Māori with, and one is Pākehā, and the other one is actually, she's from Poland. So she's Polish, but she lives in New Zealand. And so they've learned the language just because they live here, and, they want, I know with my friend who is Pākehā, she just wants to see a different story. She wants a different story for her, eventually for her grandchildren. So we do have people like that who are, very supportive and are just great allies. And then on the other side, we also have people who are very much against it, who even protest against it. They'll say, why is Te Reo Maori being shoved down our throats? Because a lot of times now, a lot of the, on like the news, a lot of the newsreaders, they'll say they're greeting in Māori. They'll be like, tēnā koutou katoa, welcome to the news, or however they do it. And they'll even include Māori words from time to time in their broadcasts, which is going out to the whole country. And so, yeah, so we definitely have those people who are, really against it, and they feel like it's being, forced onto them. And they're just, ultimately, I just think they're not aware of the larger situation where, the British did come and they took the vast majority of our land and almost wiped out our culture and our language. And so, again, this goes back to those differences in thinking. So, when people who are white respond to that, it's clear to me that they don't have any connection to their ancestry, to their whakapapa, because, they're benefiting from the system of colonization. And so is there racism in New Zealand? Yes, there is, and, different, ways that people are treated based on the color of their skin. And so, yeah, we do have all that here as well. And, in saying that, though, I do feel, things are slowly changing, and we are moving towards a place where, there is more acceptance, but it's a slow road. It is definitely a slow road. And I think a lot of people, like in our generation, they're waking up and they're realizing that these systems that we operate in have been extremely oppressive and detrimental to Indigenous people. But there are still people, perhaps in the generation above us who are just not having it, and
They don't get it.
Yeah, and they just don't get it. They don't see it, and they're still just holding on to their belief of ultimately, white is right. And so, yeah, so it's been interesting, obviously living in the US, and seeing the different situations over there that have been happening, to the Black community and the Native American community. Yeah, and so it's an interesting situation. But in a way, I feel like living in America and being able to do things like anti-racism courses and really having firsthand experiences as well with my children, because my girls they're Māori, they're also Native American, and they're also Black American. So having these real experiences has really had me be able to do the work for myself as a brown woman, and then also just work through the vehicle of my my language class and my language school, to just bring light to these things.
That's the only way we drive out the darkness, is to bring light to the situation. And I think the next generation, I'm speaking it into action, the next generation is going to get it right, and they're going to make us proud. I have to say, my favorite thing, okay, this is a little story time. I'm going to make it short, but one of my favorite things is watching the All Blacks do their Haka. And this is so embarrassing. I've had an occasional, slow Wednesday, Friday, Saturday night of just watching like video after video after video of the All Blacks. I'm not a rugby fan, but I will watch these fellas um, do their Haka performance before the match. And even like the basketball team, I've seen the video of the New Zealand basketball team doing it. I think they were playing the US basketball team. I don't remember when, but I've seen them do it. And it is, without exaggeration, one of my favorite things in life to watch. I just think that it's so beautiful and so moving and powerful and just majestic. Um, and I really encourage anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about to Google it, because it will change your life. What I would love to know some of the background of this tradition, and what is its significance and importance in Maori culture. And if you know, I don't know if you do, but if you know, like, what is the significance for performing it at the start of a sporting event?
Great question, Ali. Yes, so as well as teaching the Maori language, I also teach Haka. And, I've been lucky enough to teach Haka in different states in America. And actually, I've taught for a lot of corporate companies because they use Haka as a way to, energize their employees for like team bonding and empowerment. So the Haka is our traditional war dance. So it is a war challenge. And so, traditionally, there's many different types of Haka, but traditionally there would be a Haka performed before a battle would happen between two tribes. And the hope was that the Haka would be so scary, so fierce that the battle wouldn't occur. But nowadays you can see Haka for weddings, for funerals, on the sports fields. We did a Haka here in New Zealand for the Black Lives Matter protest, which is awesome. And so it's really gotten out there in terms of, out there in the world, with the All Blacks initially making it famous or bringing it to that world stage, but also with social media and YouTube, just, these videos are going viral. So
I love it.
yeah, so it's amazing because I've watched many of those YouTube videos as well myself, as obviously as someone who teaches the Haka and is in the Māori world. And it's amazing that even though you're watching it on YouTube, you can still feel, we call it the mana, we can still feel the mana through the computer screen. And like, yeah, I know there was a funeral Haka and I think I ended up like crying. It's just so powerful, like so powerful that it's reading through a screen, right? And so it is a very powerful war dance, and there's also that spiritual connection as well, that I think we as Māori people have, but especially through the Haka. So the Haka, it's a part of our traditional Māori performing arts. So our kapa Haka, or traditional Māori performing arts, it's one of several elements which make up that body of knowledge. And in terms of the sports field, so what the All Blacks are doing when they do the Haka is they're laying down the challenge. So this is them expressing the challenge and also expressing who they are as the national New Zealand rugby team. And it's also, a lot of people say because they do the Haka at the beginning of their games, this is why they win so many games, because it does bring the players together. It does. I have a Kapa Haka group in Los Angeles, and it's always that you feel that connectedness in a very spiritual way when you're doing the Haka with others. And so a lot of All Blacks fans, they do believe that the Haka is really kind of the power behind the All Blacks, or that's really what has them unite so well to then win a lot of the games.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have to come to one of my Haka workshops.
Yes,
Ali.
yes, yeah. I'm there. I'm ready.
I think it's so powerful because it's really an opportunity to fully express yourself in this very traditional and ancestral way. And then also that facial gesture that you were talking about, it's called the pukana. And, some Māori say that the pukana is your deepest, most spirit being expressed on your face. And so in that way, it's very powerful dance. People do it. They do a haka if they're facing different obstacles in their lives, a haka or a challenge, or they do a haka against, something that might not be going well, or it's also a powerful release if you're feeling worried or stressed or angry. And I think that's another part of it, is that there's nothing in the Western culture when you can express like that. I think the closest is like martial arts, like karate, or different types of taekwondo. In martial arts, there's the element, there's the projection of the voice and the movements. Although those are from, the Asian cultures, but in the Western culture, I think this is another reason why people are really attracted to the haka, apart from the very, the spiritual element. It is that, because I've thought about this a lot, and I'm like, there's literally nothing in the Western culture that is an acceptable form of expressing yourself in this specific way. Like if you, if you raise your voice, your neighbors might call the police or something. And with apartment living being a big thing in, LA and New York, it's like, that's, you can't really do that. And so, I think that's another attractive element about it, why people, they love watching it so much, but even more is they want to learn it, because it does allow yourself to express who you are, and that full self-expression in a way that's just not available in Western culture.
Yeah. I had never thought of that, but that's totally true. This is probably why people attach onto unhealthy addictions, because we don't have healthy ways of, it's normal to be frustrated or scared or anxious or anything. And when you don't have any acceptable, normal, quote unquote, way of releasing that, you start drinking or doing drugs or gambling or, I didn't realize that Haka is also performed by women. Is the role of women in this dance, is it the same as the role of men, or is there a separate or special role for women?
That's a great question, Ali. And, I have been asked, or have been, in America, I've had people come up to me and say, wow, you're the first woman I've ever seen do the haka. And so, I know it is portrayed as, kind of a male dance, but actually haka is for men, it's for women, it's for children. So it's something, it's for people who are, I've taught elderly, I've taught people, who are in a wheelchair, they can still do it, but they'll just be sitting down. So it is for everyone. But in terms of those different roles, there are definitely a few differences when it comes to, how the men do their haka stance versus the women, and then the pukana, the facial gesture. There's differences there when it comes to men versus women. And then in terms of, how we would stand, in that part. So with my kapa haka group and with kapa haka groups in general, the men would come to the front row. So usually the men would be in the front line, and then the women would be behind the men, but still doing the haka, maybe, with a different stance. And sometimes the actions are slightly different for women as well. But the men are in the front to protect the women, because traditionally it was, it was on a battlefield, right? You were going to battle between another tribe, and so the men would be in the front to protect the women.
Okay.
But in saying that, we also have haka that are specifically for women. So there's a haka that was composed, and it's the most famous women's haka. And so women would so in that case, the women are at the front and the men are at the back.
Yes.
So, and a lot of times too, I've had different there's been different thoughts about me as a woman teaching the Haka. But, often people don't realize that because I am doing it in Los Angeles, and there's very few Māori men who are actively engaging in our traditions in LA. And there's just not a lot of Māori people in general living in the States. So, I have had different, things, or people sharing different opinions about a woman leading a Haka. But, often I'll just say, well, look, there are no men here to lead it. And then part of me also, I've talked in the past about the influence of the patriarchy on our culture. And so, along with colonization, the British brought with them also the patriarchy. And so as a result of that, the voices of Māori women have been silenced for quite some time. And it's only now we're starting to see, Māori women writing books and really expressing our side of the culture, and, things that are specific just to Māori and also just to Māori women. So, an example of that for me is when I was young, I always knew who the god of the ocean was. His name is Tangaroa. So Tangaroa is our god of the ocean. But it was only a few years ago that I found out the name of the goddess of the ocean, and her name is Hinemoana Nui. And I know that's an impact of the patriarchy on my culture. The fact that as a small child, I was taught Tangaroa, but I was never taught Hinemoana Nui. But from a Māori perspective, we need both these divine masculine and divine feminine elements to come together and to procreate. And so Tangaroa and Hinemoana Nui are the parents of everything in the ocean. So the fish, the starfish, the eels, the seaweed, so everything in the ocean, they are, the parents of. And so, that's just an example, one of many, of how the patriarchy has had an influence and inevitable impact, as, brought along with colonization on our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can non-Indigenous people in New Zealand, or even visitors like I will be someday to New Zealand, support the Maori community? And furthermore, how can we respectfully engage with the community and continue to honor the community and their land?
Oh, wow. That's a really great question, Ali. I think one of the first things that comes to mind for people who are, non-Maori is to do your own internal work, and because it starts with you. And I'm talking here specifically on the topic of racism, because, a lot of us have internalized racism, internalized patriarchy, things like that, that cause people to act in ways that are detrimental to people of color. And so I think, that's one of the biggest things people can do to support Indigenous people of color, is to do your own internal work and deal with your internalized racism. So I think that is a top one, top on the list. And then, other ways I think are to support Māori-owned businesses or people of color owned businesses, but in the context of New Zealand, Māori-owned, support, Māori community projects, Māori organizations, Māori fundraisers, because ultimately, wherever you're living in New Zealand, you're living on native land, and there's a big movement there in the US, with, the whole land back movement. And, ultimately, a lot of New Zealand people have benefited from Māori losing our land and, them then establishing themselves on the land. And so a lot of, not everyone is kind of thinking like that, but I encourage people to think like that and to think, well, look, you're benefiting from a system that oppresses Māori and other people of color. So, in order to, I guess one of the concepts is reparations, but, even just supporting Māori community or local organizations who support Māori in the community. Yeah, those kind of things, I think really are beneficial. Also for my classes for Learn Maori Abroad, I have like a scholarship program. And so I've had a lot of people generously donate money so I can provide scholarships to Māori people who live overseas, who live abroad, and who might not otherwise be able to learn their language. And so that's been really great. And, I've had all sorts of people donate to our scholarship program. And so even like things like that, because, that's an opportunity for those who benefit from the systems that we live in to be able to give back now to our Māori communities.
Since you are talking about Learn Maori Abroad, tell us where we can find you, tell us how to get in touch, and how can we donate to the scholarship that you have too, if we want to support and we want to encourage and honor the Maori community.
Well, I am on Facebook and Instagram, and I also have a website. So it's, learnmaoriabroad.com, and then Learn Maori Abroad on social media. And you're also welcome to email me at info@learnmaoriabroad.com. We do have our next round of classes starting in January. So I'll be opening up the enrollments for that this week. But yeah, and then in terms of the scholarship program, you're welcome to just email me. I think also I have a link there on my Instagram, on my link tree, so you could also look into that on there. But yeah, those are just the main ways to get in touch.
Amazing. I will add the links to all of these into the show notes for this episode. Well, Amelia, I want to thank you so much for this conversation. I learned so much. I have one more question for you. Do you have any jokes, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Te Reo Maori to share?
Ellie, at first I thought you were going to stop there on jokes, and I was like, oh no, I don't have any jokes. No, but I do, something, that came up earlier for me, and I think it was when we're talking about the Haka, and it's this idea that, us expressing ourselves like this in the Maori culture, through the Haka. And I was also thinking, well, that's not acceptable. That's not an acceptable way of expression. And there's nothing like that in the Western culture. What that brought to mind was the idea of I te ao, I te pō. And it's from a Karakia that I use in my beginner's course. And it's talking about that we shall live in light and darkness. And so I think a big part of the Western culture is that, we're always saying, oh, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm good. How are you? And there's this like resistance towards, quote unquote, the darkness. But in the Indigenous culture and in our culture, we give each element the same light, the same weight, I should say. So the light and the darkness. So both is equal. But I do notice that in Western culture, there's a big emphasis on always, oh, I've got to always look happy and like I have it all together and, oh, I'm good. Whereas in our culture, there's an equal reverence for light and darkness. And in that sense, you don't get caught up in either one, and I think with the Western culture, because of this huge emphasis on like always being good and look at me, I'm always happy, that people do get caught up in the darkness a lot more because it's resisted a lot more, or it's kind of pushed under the rug, so to speak. Yeah, so, I think that's part of what I'm wanting to share with your listeners is that you can embrace both. You can embrace the light and the darkness. And, darkness doesn't necessarily have to be labeled a quote unquote bad thing, because from an Indigenous perspective, it just exists. Just like, the sun goes up and it's daytime, and now the sun is down and it's nighttime. It just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to have those times in our lives which there's a lot of light, and we're going to have times in our lives where there's darkness, and one is not better than the other. They're actually equal, and we need the darkness so we can appreciate the light, and we need the light so we can appreciate the darkness, just like day and night. And as Māori, we relate a lot of our sayings and our proverbs and our our prayers to nature, to the environment. So so that's what I wanted to share, and I thought it was appropriate, as well, because to tie back into what we were talking about with the haka.
Yeah. Can you teach me the phrase?
Yes, so it is from a karakia. Would it work for me to share the whole karakia and then I will share the line?
Yes.
Okay, so and this can also be our closing karakia. Ko te reo o ngā manu tērā, ka tangi nei I te ao. Kua uru ko te rā, ki wanga nui, ia rangi nui ia papatū anuku. Ko rangi nui ki runga, ko papatū anuku ki raro. Ka heke iho ngā roimata ia rangi nui. Ka hiki aki te kohu ia papatū anuku. Ko te tohu tērā. Ka ora tawa I te ao, I te pō. Tūturu whakamaua kia tīna. Tīna, haumie, huie, tae ki e. All right. And so the line there was, e ora ana tawa I te ao, I te pō. And that's saying that we shall live in light and darkness.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat after you.
So it's ka ora tawa.
Ka ora tawa.
I te ao.
I te ao.
I te pō.
I te pō. Ka ora tawa. I te ao. I te pō.
Very good. Tēnā pai. That was so great, Ali. Wow. You got...
Oh, my first Te Reo Maori words.
Oh, beautiful.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really beautiful.
Thank you so much, Ali. Ngā mihi nunu kia koe. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful connecting with you and sharing about Te Reo Maori and Te Ao Maori, the Maori culture, with you and your listeners. And thanks for having me.
Thanks. Before I let you go, really quickly, after we've been having this kind of conversation and learning and talking with one another in Te Reo Maori, what would be the best way to say goodbye?
Well, to say goodbye, we can say, let's do this one. So this is mā te wā. So mā te wā is used to say goodbye, but it also means in due time. And so, the reason I like this one, so, mā te wā as a farewell, but it's also the idea of that, when you plant a seed and you water it and, it gets enough sun, it's going to grow in due time. And it's something that we can also apply to our own lives, that, things will happen in due time. And, being patient with ourselves and also with others. So, often I use it with my students too, like mā te wā in due time, because, they're so excited and they just really want to get to like conversational or become more fluent in the language, but, it just takes time. So we'd like to remind them mā te wā in due time. And it's something that a kaumātua shared with me, who he was the grandfather of one of my assistants. And so it's also special for that reason, because he would come to our classes and share a lot of his knowledge with us. So, but mā te wā, to say farewell, but also in due time. So it's like mā te wā, like I'll see you again in due time, but also things happen in due time.
I love that. Mā te wā, Amelia, and thank you again so much.
Mā te wā, Ali.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.